Last Sunday, I talked about how Hanukkah, if you recall, is rooted in social justice, specifically in the freedom to practice religion, and how we are all called to be the shamash, which, if you recall, is the highest candle there in the center of the Hanukkah, or the menorah, and it lights all the other candles. And that we are here, in essence, to be lamp lighters for one another. And so continuing this theme of light and allowing love to be the way, again, this past Wednesday, all over the world, Buddhists just celebrated Bodhi Day, or Rohatsu, as the holiday is called in Japan. And again, this celebrates enlightenment, the enlightenment of the Buddha. And as the story goes, Siddhartha Gautama was a very privileged, wealthy prince, and he lived a very sheltered life. And there came a time in his 20s when he ventured outside of the palace gates and for the very first time was devastated to see the suffering in the world. He saw poverty and, as the story goes, death and pain for the first time. Again, he had been very sheltered on purpose from that. And this sparked in him a lifelong question to understand human suffering. And so he then renounced all of his princely kingdom and his wealth, and he traveled around India as an ascetic to try to understand, to seek, to learn what this suffering was all about. And as the story goes, after many years, he finally stopped seeking outside of himself the answers, and he sat down under the Bo tree, which was later to become the Bodhi tree. And in most traditions, many traditions, it is said that he sat there for 49 days. And when he arose out of that meditation, he was enlightened. He was the enlightened Buddha. And so Bodhi Day really, is this incredible time of celebrating the Buddha's consciousness, which traveled worldwide and lives within us today. This year, it just so happens that Bodhi Day coincides with the Christian holiday of Advent, and we are celebrating the Week of Joy in tandem today with Bodhi Day. It's a lovely lineup, folks, enlightenment and joy. It's one-stop shop here at NTCSL. So, the great religious historian Houston Smith wrote, "Buddhism begins with a man. And then in later years, when India was afire with his message and kings themselves were bowing before the Buddha, people came to him and asked what he was, not who he was, but what he was. 'Are you a god?' they asked him. 'No.' 'Are you an angel?' they asked. He replied, 'No.' 'Are you a saint?' they asked. 'No.' 'What are you then?' 'I am awake,' he replied." The title of my talk this morning is "Welcome to Your Awakening." Yes, woo-woo, how about that? Can we all step into this idea that this awakening is not for the privileged few, but actually intrinsically designed for each one of us? So what is a spiritual awakening exactly? What does that exactly mean? I like Deepak Chopra's definition. He writes, "Awakening happens when you are no longer living in a dream world where you filter everything through your ego and focus on either the future or the past. Instead," he writes, "you have almost simultaneously an awareness of your individual self and your connection to everything and everyone around you." That is a spiritual awakening. And it's important to really understand that spiritual awakening isn't something that just happens once and then voila, we walk on water. That doesn't happen. No. Spiritual awakening is an ongoing and hopefully ever-present activity of love within us. And really, it is initially activated by just the smallest spark of the divine. And these sparks of the divine that activate our spiritual awakening are everywhere. They are everywhere. A spark of divinity is often a minuscule moment of time, and sometimes we don't pay attention to it. Sometimes we can miss it. But that spark is that minuscule moment that often happens through each other. I talked a little bit about this last week, right? This divine connection that happens through us. And this spark, this sensing the divine or something greater than ourselves can happen in any moment. It can happen the moment we fall in love, or we see our child or our grandchild or our fur baby. We love our fur babies here, don't we? For the very first time. It can happen in that moment. It can happen, the moment that you see the face of God or the face of the divine, or you sense the presence of angels before you. Maybe that spark for you, who knows, maybe it was that moment in a class or a workshop or in a meditation years ago when a combination of words from your teacher landed in your heart in such a way that in that moment, you got the realization that your God, the God of love, was no longer a man who was moody in the sky, but rather a presence, an indwelling spirit, a presence of love within you and around you. Or maybe, perhaps, that spark of the divine might happen while you, let's say, are on a walk, and maybe you see your next door neighbor in a simple act of loving kindness, as the Buddhists call it, helping your neighbor, the gal across the street who could use that extra hand. And you saw in that moment, through that interaction, the divine love, the presence of spirit. Perhaps that divine spark happened in a moment when someone apologized to you, or in a moment when you felt and knew that you were forgiven for something that you had done to hurt another. Spiritual awakening happens everywhere. It can happen that moment, when you walk into Target, or when you order your coffee from a barista and they look you in the eyes and they just say hello or welcome in a certain way. Do you know what I'm talking about? And you feel it. It's not just like, hello, what can I do for you? It's that connection, right? That is the spark of the divine that I am talking about. It's in those moments that we recognize that God is right here, that we are truly never alone. Maybe it's that simple line in a song that means so much to you that you hear in that most important moment that helps you turn left or turn right or lay that thing down or start something new. Spiritual awakenings are happening all around us all the time, my friends. Hear me, if we are awake to them. It is not something outside happening to us. It is something that we are continuously participating in. Are you with me? It's something that is happening all of the time. It's this divine symphony, if you will, of communication, that spirit, that love, that God, this ongoing conversation that we have through each other and Mother Nature and our sweet fur babies. It is constantly happening. And when we begin to shift our perception and understand that is the way the divine works, everything changes. We see the world and people in a very, very different way. In fact, if you are here today, if you are watching online, you are clearly smack dab in the middle of a divine spiritual awakening. Congratulations for saying yes to being here. Hafiz wrote, "Awake, my dear, be kind to your sleeping heart. Take it out into the vast fields of light and let it breathe. Let it breathe our hearts. Sometimes they fall asleep, right? Sometimes we just get tired. or we forget, or we might even resist recognizing in that moment with the barista or the guy at Target or our neighbor. We resist that connection because maybe we're just tired, And that's okay. The thing is, when we can bring our awareness to that moment, we do better next time. It's a decision. It is a choice that we get to make in this life. And the thing is once you start living your life from an awakened state, you can't really ignore it. I mean, if you go back to sleep, you know you're going back to sleep, right? You know it. But here's the thing, and I'm going to invite this to be some comfort for you. The very same light that was at the center of the Buddha and Jesus of Nazareth and St. Catherine of Siena and Lao Tzu and Guru Nanak and Hildegard von Bingen and Zoroaster and Baha'u'llah and all of the great teachers, saints, and mystics who have walked this earth, that same light is within you and within me. The same light. And I invite that to be some inspiration for you to stay awake as best you can. All of them taught this. Jesus said that we will do greater things than these. The Buddha said the way is not in the sky, it is in the heart. It is right here. Therefore, we are called to stay awake. We are all of us God's stuff. We are all of God, of love. It is not reserved for the few. This love belongs to each one of us on the planet, and this power of love and energy is within us, and it is ours to remember this throughout the week. It's one thing to come on Sunday or to watch when you watch online. It is another to practice the awakened state. The great news is that we have spiritual tools to assist us on this continued path of spiritual awakening, and these tools are based in science. They are based in science. So our limbic system, that part of our brain where we feel fear and we feel frustration, that part of our brain where we want to go back to sleep, where we want to check out, right? That is the place involved, the limbic system, in our behavioral and our emotional responses. Now, when we relax our limbic system, when we relax that part of our brains, we are more able to show up in the world from a place that is balanced, that is awake, and that is more willing to choose love. So how do we relax the limbic system? How do we relax this place in our brain that is responsible for our emotional responses? We can relax it through prayer. We can relax it through soothing music, through yoga, through exercise, through mindful breathing. Everyone take a deep, nourishing breath. Can you feel that? It's literally relaxing the limbic system in the brain. And the heaviest hitter, what science has taught us, is the greatest way to relax and calm and soothe our limbic system. It's meditation. Science knows this. The ancients knew this. Dr. Richard Davidson from the University of Wisconsin pioneered studies on the neurological effects of meditation. He started studying the brains of meditating Tibetan monks, and his team discovered that certain areas of their brains would light up when they were in a state of compassion. Literally, when they were in a state of compassion during meditation, a certain area of their brain would light up. And I love this part, they were able to record that these Tibetan monks felt acutely the experience while meditating of another person's suffering. But, and this is the key, they were able to let go of it much more quickly than non-meditators. The monks felt the deep pressure of the suffering of others that was evident in the brain imaging, but it was a much briefer impact on their neural system than the non-meditator. And that briefer impact means that they automatically let go of that pain more quickly. In other words, they are able to be fully present and compassionate to the pain of others, but it doesn't overwhelm their system like it can for so many of us. How many of us have felt overwhelm during these past 2 years? It's a very real thing. And what can happen when we are in a state of overwhelm is we can get tired. We can want to go back to sleep. We can want to stand up and do what is right and be activists out in the world, but it can be exhausting. The best activists I know are daily meditators because they are able to be fully present and compassionate to someone else's pain, but then that part of the brain is not overwhelmed. It is able to let go of that so they can do their work to help support others in a healthy way. Are you with me? Do you see where I'm going with this? Right. So it's just so important for us as people of faith, as people on this spiritual path, to do everything we can to stay awake and compassionate to others so that we can be the shamash, so that we can be a lamplighter for others, so that we can help those who are in need of it. So my friends, if you haven't yet taken up the spiritual practice of meditating, now might be the time to consider it. So to this, and an absolute connection to this, is this third beautiful week of Advent. And this week we are leaning into joy. Joy is an inner feeling, and happiness is the outer expression of inner joy. So I want to tell you a story. And it's a story that I love. It's about a monk, and he was sitting outside his monastery, and he was awaiting some visitors. And it was monsoon time in Nepal. So there was a lot of mud and there was a lot of rain and water. And what he and the monks did in order so that the visitors wouldn't have to slop through the mud is they put these large bricks in a pathway so that when people arrived, they could, walk on the bricks on their way to the sort of the front porch area that was covered of the monastery. And so this particular monk was sitting out there on the porch awaiting the guests. And, it was raining, it was muddy, it was monsoon season in Nepal. Okay. So the first guest, a woman, he could see her from afar, and she was walking. And then he could hear her, and she was complaining. She was very, very angry as she was walking. Can you imagine? She's walking on all these bricks, and she's not from there, and she's going to this monastery to learn how to meditate. Good idea. And she is complaining the entire time with each step. This monk is just sitting there, and he's watching this, and he's thinking, wow, well, isn't that interesting? And he's sort of chuckling inwardly at her anger at the rain and the mud. And by the time she arrived, she was in a state, and she was just furious by all of it, and she stomped in, and he just sort of noticed. And then the second woman started coming from the distance, and he saw her, same situation. She's walking on the bricks, and she's hopping on them. And she's like, well, isn't this lovely? It's raining, which means there's no dust. Wasn't this wonderful of the monks to lay this out for us? Isn't this marvelous? And she arrives, and he stood there, and he bowed deeply. He bowed deeply. The idea here is that the situation is exactly the same, and yet the choice that those women made were the complete opposite choices. We are always, always at choice. This monk was none other than Matthieu Ricard, who is the Tibetan monk originally from France, who has been called the world's happiest man. A title he humbly dismisses He's called this because he participated in a 12-year brain study on meditation and compassion led by Dr. Richard Davidson, the neuroscientist I just mentioned. So Davidson hooked Ricard's head up to 256 sensors and found that when Ricard was meditating on compassion, his mind was unusually light. And when meditating on happiness, Ricard's brain scans showed excessive activity in his brain's prefrontal cortex, allowing him abnormally large capacities for happiness and an abnormally large reduced propensity towards negativity. Mathieu Ricard wrote, "Happiness is a state of inner fulfillment, not the gratification of inexhaustible desires for outward things." It depends on your definition of happiness. Think about the difference between the two women arriving at the monastery. It depends on your definition of joy, whether it is inward or outward. So I want to do something today that might feel very antithetical to the times we are living in. Are you open? All right. This is something that the happiest man alive teaches. Mathieu Ricard teaches happiness meditation. So in honor of this week of joy, I thought that we could step into this together. And really, all it requires is for you to lay down any resistance, first of all, because we are living in an increasingly cynical world, are we not? We get to change that, and this is one of the ways we get to change that. So I invite you to lay down, any resistance to this, and I invite you to just, in this moment, think of a couple things that make you happy. It's different for everyone. Someone you love. Maybe it's your fur baby. Maybe it is art that you create. Maybe it's being in nature or music. Whatever it is, maybe it's baking something. Whatever it is that makes you happy, that makes you feel joy, just bring into your mind a couple of those things right now, and I invite you to just take a deep breath. And those of you online, take a deep breath. Close your eyes and allow those things that make you, your unique, magnificent soul, feel joy, whatever those things are for you. Allow yourself to visualize the things that bring you joy in this moment. Just allow them to run through your mind. Maybe it's a couple of things. Your mind might want to stay on one, go to the next, maybe go back. That's fine. Just allow yourself this moment of happiness. Give yourself this moment to feel joy from within. Stay with it. Stay with it. Feel how it makes your heart smile. Notice how you feel in your body temple. Allow this joy to be felt. It's all right if it's fleeting, just go back to it. It's fine. Be gentle with yourself. Allow joy in, my friend. Taking in a deep breath. And on the exhale, I invite you to gently open your eyes, still staying with that feeling of joy, of happiness. peace. How did that feel? Ooh, you're all like zenned out. Wow. Yeah, wowie zowie. I love it. So here's the thing. Here is the thing. I'm going to invite you this week, just like last week, I invited you to light a candle each night for someone or people. Did you do that? I did it. Oh, now I have this thing where I'm lighting candle. Every time I light a candle, it's for a person. I can't light a candle without lighting it for a person now. I'm so excited. So continuing with that love and putting that love into the world, I'm going to invite you this week, at least for 5 minutes. You can do this for 5 minutes. Work your way up to 15 if you can. Set an alarm on your phone or on Alexa or whatever works for you, and just sit and allow yourself to meditate on that which brings you joy and happiness, allowing it to transform you. What we know through neuroscience is that our brains, there's neuroplasticity. They're actually continuing to grow. We used to think that our brains stopped growing. We now understand they don't. They continue growing. It doesn't matter how old you are. You can literally train your mind. We teach this in New Thought. You can train your mind to focus on the good. To focus on the good. In the same way you train your mind to play an instrument or to play tennis. This is something that we teach. We train our mind to do this, understand. We're training our minds to focus on the good so that we can do more good in the world. Are you with me? The more you do this, the more you are of service to others. It's an incredibly benevolent practice. So I invite you this week, are you willing? To just take 5, 10, 15 minutes each day and focus on the good. Focus on what brings you happiness and watch what happens in your life. Just watch. You're literally changing your brains. When we are feeling inwardly fulfilled, when we are feeling that sense of joy and divine connection that we all have with each other, life is gentler, my friends. Life is kinder. There are less hard edges. We are less like the complaining woman on the bricks. And we are more like the one delighting in the fact that, yes, there's rain, we deal with that, but there is no dust. We are always at choice. There is a path, a divine path that has been laid out before each one of us, and that path will always lead to love if we choose it.